Magandang araw ka mag-aral. Ako si Sir Bernard, ang iyong guro at gabay sa pag-aaral dito sa Grade 6 Mathematics. Ihanda na ang iyong module, papel at lapis at tayo ay mag-aaral. Our lesson for today is the concept of ratio and proportion. After going through this lesson, you are expected to illustrate and understand the concept of ratio and proportion. What is proportion? Proportion is a comparison of two ratios. Proportion is a statement of equality between two ratios. When two ratios are equal, they form a proportion. There are two terms in a proportion. We have the means and the extremes. Now let us have the standard form of a proportion. Let's say A is to B equals C is to D. A is the first term, B is the second term, C the third term, and D the last term. The means includes the second term and the third term, which is B and C. While the extremes, it includes the first term and the last term, which is A and D. When do we say ratios are proportion? In the proportion, the cross products of equal ratios are equal. Let's say A is to B equals C is to D. Now let us take the cross products of A and D and the cross product of B and C. Then we have A times D equals B times C. Now let us take the law of proportions. The product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes. Let's say A is to B equals C is to D, wherein B and C are the means, A and D are the extremes. Then we have the product of the means and the product of the extremes, that is now B times C equals A times D. Now let us have example number 1. Tell whether the ratios form a proportion. Now let us use 3:4 and 6:8 as our ratios. Writing them into a proportion, 3:4 equals 6:8. Now let us take the cross product of 3 and 8 and the cross products of 6 and 4. Then we have now 3 times 8 equals 24, the product of the extremes. 4 times 6 also equal to 24, and that is the product of the means. Since the product of the extremes equals to the product of the means, then we have now 3:4 and 6:8, a proportion. Now let us have another example. Let us use 1:4 and 2:3. Writing them into a proportion, we have 1:4 equals 2:3. Let us take the cross product of 1:3 or 1 and 3, 2 and 4. Then we have 1 times 3 equals 3. That is the product of the extremes. Then 4 times 2 equals 8, the product of the means. Now notice that 3 and 8 are not equal. Therefore, 1:4 and 2:3 are not proportion. Now let us have example number 2. Find the value of x. Now we are going to find the value of x using proportions. Let us use 2 is to 4 and 3 is to x. Writing it into a proportion by putting an equal sign, we have now 2 is to 4 equals 3 is to x. That is our given. Now, since the product of the extremes as 2 and x, we will write it as 2 times x equals the product of the means. We have now 4 times 3. So we are now applying the law as the product of the extreme is equal to the product of the means. Simplifying it, we have 2 times x is 2x equals 4 times 3 equals 12. Again, we apply the product of the extremes is equal to the product of the means. Now let us take our given. 2 times x equals 12 as the product of the means or the extremes and the product of the means. Let us find the value of x. So let us write 2x equals 12. In order to eliminate 2, we will divide this 2x by 2. And since we divide this by 2, we will also divide this 12 by 2. So we cancel 2 and 2. That will give us x equals, then we divide 12 by 2 will give us 6. The value of x now is 6. Now let us check our answer. Let us use 2 is to 4 equals 3 is to x. Applying the law of proportion as the product of the means and the extremes, we have 2x as x is equals to 6. We have now 2 times 6 equals 4 times 3, wherein 2 and x are the extremes. Then we have 2 and 2 times 6. Then we have now 4 and 3 as the means, and the product now is 4 times 3. Taking the product, 2 times 6 is equal to 12, and 4 times 3 is also equal to 12. So we have now 12 equals 12. So we solve the value of x by using now proportion that states the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes. Now let us have our summary. Proportion is a comparison of two ratios. There are two terms in proportion: the extremes and the means. Two ratios are proportion when the product of the extremes is equal to the product of the means. Thank you! At muli, ito si Sir Bernard, ang iyong guro at gabay sa araw na ito na nagsasabing, mag-aral ng mabuti upang umunlad ang sarili. Paalam!